English grammar can be very difficult. And when you're writing or speaking, remembering how all the pieces fit together is a big challenge. So what should you do? Well, I believe the best thing to do is to learn how all the pieces fit together, bit by bit, a little bit at a time, step by step, by example. And that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to be showing you how to use direct and indirect objects. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry. I will explain it step by step by example. If you have any questions as we go, leave those in the comments. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe. And now, let's get into it. So let's talk about how we can use direct and indirect objects. Just as a reminder before we hop over to the board. An object is on the other side of the verb, not the thing or the person doing the action, right? So if I say, I gave it, then I am the subject, gave is the verb, and it, whatever it is the object. But there are two main types of objects, direct and indirect objects. Now again, we're going to look at some examples here on the board. A direct object is what the action of the verb is acting upon, right? So a direct object will answer what, or who, maybe technically whom, right, after the verb. For example, she ate an apple. She ate an apple. And an indirect object is more about to whom or to what or for who, for whom that action is done. That's the indirect, right? So if I gave it, well, it is the direct object. It's kind of the thing that the action is acting on, is about. But if I say I gave it to her, then her is the indirect object. Now, sometimes the indirect object goes in front of the direct object, and sometimes it goes after. So let's start looking at some examples. Let's first go over to the board so that we can understand how this works, okay? Okay, so here we are on the board. Now I'm just going to give my same examples here. I'm just going to pull this down. I'm going to give the same examples that I gave. We're just going to write them down and try to understand how this works, okay? Actually, no, I'm going to use, I said it, I want to avoid it. I want to give a specific noun. Okay, so she ate an apple. So she is the subject, ate, past tense verb, and an apple is the direct object, basically answering the question, what, or who, or whom. Okay. Now, if we want to understand indirect, she gave her sister an apple. Okay, now, this is not for every single type of verb. Because in this case, ate is a direct relationship between she and the apple, right? So most of the time, in this case, we're not bringing in other things, other objects. Now, I suppose you could say, for example, she ate an apple for me. Technically, that's grammatically correct, right? But often for 8, it's going to be a specific connection between these two things, connecting them with 8. In this case, she gave her sister an apple. Well, if I just say she gave her sister, that doesn't really make sense unless somehow she's able to actually use her sister as a thing to give others. But what it means here is her sister received the apple. What did her sister receive? An apple. Who received it? Her sister. So again, the indirect, and so here let's label this again. So she is again the subject, and gave is again the verb, and her sister now is the indirect object, and an apple is now still the direct object. What did you give? I gave an apple. What did you give? I gave an apple. So that's me and the apple, right? Connected by the action give. Nothing else is involved. And the apple is directly connected to the action. The action is happening to the apple. It is being given. It is the direct object. Okay? Now, somebody is receiving that apple. So if I want to now talk about the recipient of the apple, then I need an indirect object. And in this case, that is her sister. All right. So this should not be too complicated. In this case, we have subject, verb, indirect object, direct object. Okay? Great. Let's just make sure we understand the basic structure. Okay? I want you to see if you can label this in your head before I do. Mom read, what's a good baby's name? I'll use Pi. Pi, a story. I'm going to make this a little lower so that I can label it a little easier. A story. Okay. Can you label this? Do you see the structure? Who is doing the action? Who is the subject? Mom. And I'm looking over here because I'm looking at my board. Okay. Subject. What is the action? Reading. Okay. So read. Verb. Now, what if we don't know the direction of the story? We just know that this action happened. And the thing that happened specifically is that what was read? Was it a book? Was it a recipe? No, it was a story. So if we want to know what the direct object is, we look at the thing that is directly connected to the action. The action that the verb is doing to what or to whom, right? Well, maybe that makes it a little more confusing. Let's just say it like this. The thing that the verb is about. Maybe that makes it easier. That might be an easier way to say it, okay? So Mom read a story. Is that a sentence? Yes. Yes, it is. Mom read a story. Pretty clear. But now we want to introduce who she read the story to, right? To who? To whom? For what? For whom? So it's almost a second layer, right? It's almost an added detail. Because if I just say, Mom read pie, well, that doesn't even make sense. If I say Mom read a story, that makes sense at least. I don't know who heard the story, but I know she read a story, so at least I understand it. So this is, in many ways, makes it make sense. I know what this verb is about. And if I want to then add something, the recipient, who's getting it, who it's for, right? Who it is intended to be directed to, then I need the indirect object. In that case, this is pie. Okay? So that's the structure. Now, Sometimes we use a preposition. Sometimes when we are writing sentences, we use a preposition. And a preposition might be to, for, from, with, by, on. Okay, you know those, right? Right? Yeah. So if we want to use a preposition, we change the order most of the time. So before we had subject, verb, indirect object, direct object. She read him a story. But if we're using a preposition, then it changes around. So, again, usually to or for example. Often it's to and for these. So for this one, she sent a letter to her friend. And we're going to combine these as one thing, her friend. And in fact, to make it even simpler, I'm going to replace her friend with Alice. But you can say her friend, it's the same. I just want to avoid any confusion, okay? Again, we have she. What is she? Subject, verb, sent. But now, what did she send? A letter. So that's the thing that the verb is about, right? She sent a letter. She read a story. She sent a package. So this is now the direct object. That's the object of the verb, direct object of the verb. And now before, we had the indirect first here, and then the direct. So before it was she sent Alice a letter. Would that be correct if we said she sent Alice a letter? Yes, that would be perfectly correct. She sent Alice a letter. But sometimes we don't want to structure it that way. We want to use a preposition. And so when we are using a preposition, then the indirect object goes after the direct object. In this case, she sent, verb, a letter, direct, to, preposition, Alice, indirect. And if that is instead her friend, then it's the same. Still the indirect, okay? Now, what about for? Let's try an example with for. Let's do one more example. I just want to make sure you've got this. Okay. I made this for you. That's a simple sentence, right? I, subject, made, verb, this. What is this? Well, this could be, I made this hammock. I made this casserole. I made this box. Whatever, right? This thing. I made this thing. Made this thing. So the verb is connected to its direct object. In this case, that's what we're talking about. What the verb is about. So we have the direct object, for preposition, and you. Could be a name here or whatever. Them, whatever. It's still indirect. Okay? And that's it. That's basically it. To get it, to make sure you've got it, hopefully it's clear the way I've explained it, what you have to do is practice it. So I'll give you a challenge to practice. Okay? Here is your challenge to practice this grammar. I want you to create So here's your practice. I want you to create 4 sentences using 1, the verb give, and I'm just going to put direct object book and indirect. I should write that whole thing. Her. And I want you to make 2 with that. And then I want you to do another one with verb tell, direct joke, indirect us. Okay? So I want you to try to see if you can make sentences with those pieces. It shouldn't be that hard with this explanation, but once you're done with them, please share them. I would love to take a look. If you found this useful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And again, let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and get a free course, Natural English Conversations, in the links in the description.